Welcome to the 108 Big Words podcast. I'm your host, Sam Dyer. The 108 Big Words podcast is where you'll find big conversations about big words. Words like miracles, words like happiness, words like connection. I'm living my purpose and I'm on a mission to spread love, light, and laughter. So stay tuned for our next episode. Hello everyone and welcome. I'm here today with the Reverend Dr. Mark Haleshawn. Get the pronunciation right, get the titles right.
You got it right.
That was in the right order?
Yeah, pretty good, yep.
Brilliant. Why don't we start off, I think that's probably a great place to start. Your titles. So what does it mean? Maybe give us a bit of an intro about what you do as well.
Sure. So I'm an ordained pastor in what's called the congregational church setting, which is basically a spinoff of the Protestant denomination that evolved way back when after Luther did his thing in the Heidelberg Church. But in the United States, there are many, many different Protestant denominations, and I'm represent but one. It tends to be a little bit more democratically oriented in that the people of the church per se help to decide the theology and help to decide the direction of the church. I'm not necessarily considered the power, the authority of the church, but I work with the congregation to decide what programs to have. I certainly served as somebody who interpreted scripture and who preached and taught and counseled from that perspective. So I was ordained in that setting. I'm a doctor of theology. Many years after I was ordained, I decided to go back and get an advanced degree in theology, focusing on interreligious dialogue. I was doing this in the 90s when we were going through the Gulf War activity. And there was so much confusion about what Christianity was, what Muslims were, what the Jews were. And I decided that it was time to create a program in my church to discuss what those three monotheistic faiths had in common. And so I wrote programs and I wrote a dissertation on the three. And that was the basis of my doctoral work. And it was a fascinating experience to bring in leaders from all three different faith perspectives to discuss, yes, what we had in common, but also what made us different.
Yeah, sure. So it sounds very practical as well, rather than, although I appreciate, of course, doctorate, therefore, it's by its nature, it's academic. And yet from what you're saying, it sounds like there was quite a practical level to that as well.
Well, it was a program offered through what is called Hartford Seminary in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm from Connecticut, and it was intended to be practical. It was intended to be something that could be useful within the context of the church. I mean, I could have, gone off and done a dissertation on the theology of Karl Barth, but everybody's done that. So I wanted to make sure I was doing something that was tangible in the life of the church that people could get their hands on and understand and use. Otherwise, what's the point?
Brilliant. And you live in New York now?
No, I live in Connecticut.
Oh, you're in Connecticut still.
I'm in a town. I work from a town in Westport, Connecticut. I am currently not in the church. I won't go into the reasons particularly why, but I have found that the church life, as it were, in the United States, the church life has sort of been dwindling as a component of daily living.
Yeah.
And we're all experiencing, not just Protestants, but Catholics too, where people are trying to figure out why the church is relevant in such a world that we have now. My feeling was at the time that the church was becoming way too transactional. No checky, no surety. If you don't give to the church, you can't participate.
Right.
If you don't demonstrate love in your heart, then you're not one of us. And by the way, if you don't believe the same way we do, you're out. And I was getting more and more conflicted with that theology or that thinking. As it turns out, my personal life kind of unraveled as well. So it was time for me to look at another way of doing things. And I'm currently, believe it or not, what's called a massage therapist here in the United States,
Yep.
where I work with people to heal their bodies from all the stress that we're experiencing. I also am an equine body worker, so I work on horses as well, which has been a fascinating, soulful experience. I find them both very soulful experiences because I'm really helping people understand how they translate their lives through their body activity, and relieving some of that stress and pain and a lot of the fear that goes with it is almost a ministry in and of itself. Now, at the same time, I couldn't quite leave all my spiritual life behind, so I've started a podcast called Reclaiming the Spirit, which is on Facebook. And every now and then I offer a podcast on, it's been about a weekly experience. And I started this after the COVID activity in March, because I found that a lot of my friends and family and folks that knew me on the fringe were like, look, you've got all this wisdom and theological background. Why don't you help us get through all this scary stuff?
Sure.
Because it's looking pretty nasty out there. So I started to do some upbeat, positive podcasts on spirituality, ecumenism, and what it means to be prayerful and meditative in a time when people are really, really scared and still are. So, here we are 9 months later, and we're still wrestling with, at least in the United States, we're still wrestling with a very, very rampant COVID experience, not to mention all the political disarray that's gone with it. So I have found that my podcasts have been well received by former members of my church, people that I've known throughout my life. I have hundreds of people chime in and check out what I'm doing on a weekly basis, and I feel that it's a ministry to empower people and to lift them up, because I have reverence, which is the phrase and a term we wanted to kind of wrestle with.
Certainly is, yeah, definitely. And what would you describe, to start with, what would you describe spirituality as? Because you're thinking about that, if you're going to reclaim your spirit, then what is that? What does that mean? I know from what you said, of course, and I think I'd echo that in terms of, I think that a lot of people throughout, especially periods of lockdown, periods of hardship, are feeling in some way it's a great time for reflection and for thinking about themselves and understanding more about them. So I think for a lot of people, they can probably connect with the word spiritualism, spirituality, two different words maybe. But for you, how would you describe that?
So I feel that spirituality transcends the boundaries of quote unquote religion. Okay. We tend to define ourselves by, whether we're Jewish or Muslim or Christian or Taoist or Buddhist or any other of the major kind of belief systems out there. But I also think that these are systems. Okay. They're systems of belief seen through the lens of our culture. Right.
Yeah.
Spirituality transcends those boundaries and allows us to connect to the divine uniquely and independently, and it allows us to feel like we are part of the divine spark. We're all in this together, no matter what our skin color is, no matter what our culture is, no matter what our background is. We have a sense of reverence, as it were, for the lives that we live, and to devote ourselves to find out what our true purpose is, and to be good stewards of kindness and gentleness and faith and love and peace and hope and calm to the world around us.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of commonality with how we would both describe spirituality. It's very close to what I would probably say. To me, I think church is an institution, for want of a better word. I know that's maybe not the right word. It tends to be what people talk about. Church is an institution. It's an organization.
Yeah.
Religion to me is that is a prescriptive way that you should interact with your faith.
Right. Right.
and that therefore faith and spirituality, I find that they're quite closely related. So I think if I gave like an example of that, then I would say that I would consider myself someone who's not religious as such, but I would consider myself as someone who is definitely spiritual. So
Yeah.
I feel a connection with, whether you want to call it God, the universe, source. I don't really mind what people use as terminology, whereas my understanding would be that religion and the church would say, no, you need to call it God and you need to have a relationship with God, not the universe, and not definitely not source, but the relationship must be with God, and this is what God is, and this is who and how you should do it. I mean, is
Right.
that kind of how you
Yeah, I
feel
mean,
as well?
I served a denomination that was not very dogmatic, and it was very loose in the terms of its theological construct. But yeah, institutional faith, to give it a name, has sort of boundaries.
Mm,
And um, when you go to an institutional setting, there are certain, guidelines, if you will. And I don't think that they're wrong. I think that they're just that. They're guidelines. And if you really enjoy those guidelines because they help orient your life, that's terrific. I applaud it, even if it's very different from mine. Because I think what's important is you devote yourself to something bigger than yourself.
mm.
And in a way, that's what spirituality is. You're devoting yourself to the divine creation that you are, without its boundaries. And you can therefore accept a lot of different viewpoints and say, yeah, I can believe that too. That's, the Muslims would say, salam alaikum, which is, God be with you. Well, okay, I can go with that. And so what do they say at the end? If you salam alaikum, which is, go in peace. So, who am I as a Christian to say that that's a terrible way to invoke God in my life in the beginning and the end of an interaction? So, it's, now you can dig through that a little bit and maybe find some differences, but at the end of the day, they pretty much all point to two things. There is a God, which I firmly believe, and we are to treat each other as we love ourselves. And if we could just follow those two tenets, you can apply those two things to almost every single religious belief out there, and be inclusive. But we don't tend to do that. We tend to split hairs and say, well, if you don't believe it my way, then you're not one of us, and therefore I can't accept you. And we create wars around that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Crusades.
It's kind of like the rhetoric of God will forgive you anything apart from if you believe in the wrong type of God, or you label this wrong, or you do this and you do this. And I think, in many ways, that's why people are put off religion,
Yes.
put off the church, fall out with it as well, because I know many people that used to go and when I say used to go to church or something similar, and now don't for many different reasons. And
Right.
a lot of things, of course, I mean, it's like anything, things can be done in the name of something that don't necessarily line up truly with what that is. So you would call yourself a Christian?
I would call myself a Christian, but yes, I would say that. There's no really buts about it. However, I would also say that I am a firm believer in everybody's got a viewpoint that is worthy, and I respect that.
Yeah.
I respect all different kinds of beliefs. So I'm a bit of more of a universalist, to use a term, in that I think every belief system has merit, and they all point pretty much to the same thing.
But that's the thing, isn't it? Most of it is about really living a good life, treating other people in the right way, doing the right thing, and so on and so forth. And something I did think about when you said a moment ago that it's about treating people or loving people in the same way that you love yourself. I can't remember exactly what you said.
Love God and love others as you love yourself is really
love others as you love yourself. And I thought, actually, that's very deep, because the truth of it is that a lot of people don't actually love themselves
They
in the way
don't.
they
You're
don't
right.
love themselves in the way they are. So maybe maybe they are actually doing that.
It brings up an interesting thought that I've had over the times, that the world, as we've progressed, as time has gone by, has become more spiritually and biblically anemic. We don't really understand the tenets of our belief systems, and we believe more in what I can get from Amazon tomorrow than we do in the 23rd Psalm. And so we don't really take time to really have introspection or to reflect, to use a word that we were kicking around earlier. Part of the whole idea of being reverent as a person is taking time for yourself to know yourself, and that you love yourself enough to be able to say, I love myself enough that I'm going to care for somebody else, even if I don't know them, even if I don't identify with them, even if I haven't taken the time to figure out their life story. I'm gonna pause my judgment stick and not throw it, and I'm going to accept the fact that there's a lot I don't know, and I need to treat people with honor and with the respect that they deserve. And I think a lot of that's missing right now, and certainly our politics. I mean, we are just hammering away at, and I don't know, I can't speak to what's happening in Britain, but I know you guys are going through Brexit and everything else, but it's a sense of I'm going to respect a person first. I'm going to listen to who they are and what they say, and I'm gonna love them anyway, even if I don't agree with them. And that's a tall order for most of us. Loving somebody else, unconditional love, is one of the highest, most profound acts that I think any of us can possibly demonstrate in our lives. Because it means that we're not judging, and we're not dismissing somebody else because they may believe or act or feel differently than we do.
Yeah. Some of my training is through or to do with NLP, neuro linguistic programming, and
Right.
some of the presuppositions, if you like, the foundations of that are things like, for example, that a person is much more than their behavior.
Oh, yeah.
And that really links into what you're saying there of the idea and the premise that you shouldn't say someone is something, someone thinks something, therefore that means this, and this about them. Everyone's allowed their opinion. Yes, it's better if it's put across in a decent way. I was going to say intelligent, but that's intelligent in the sense of in a way that they are prepared to listen to others. And I think we were saying before we started recording that one of the biggest problems we've got in the world right now is polarization. It's that creation of two opposing standpoints that are miles away from each other. Right. Neither side has got room to listen to the other side. They're not interested, and they're right. So it's I'm right, you're wrong. It's that kind of stance, and that's a difficult and dangerous place to be in.
Sometimes in my training, I've done a lot of counseling in my time, and what I'll tell people is your feelings are not necessarily facts. So let's peel back from the feeling rhetoric, and it's important to know your feelings. Don't get me wrong, but are they factual? So there's a lot of anger in our culture right now. Based on what? Based on a lot of misinformation and intentional disinformation, just to kind of stir the pot. And with so much media that we're involved with, it's very hard to really read that media and understand it for what it is. And when I was growing up, there were 3 networks, and that was it. And if Walter Cronkite said, and that's the way it is, January 18th, 2021, I believed that that's the way it was. I just really didn't question it. Now, you look at almost any direction, you can pop on the internet and find almost any support for a belief system that you have. And it's not questioned.
And equally, you can find a whole load of people that will argue against it as well, and that's one of the problems in a way. So, mentioned about reverence,
Yes.
and that indeed was what we were aiming to talk about today,
Yeah.
and we'll talk
Yeah.
about. So let's kick that off. Let's start off with your definition. What is reverence, or
Oh,
what is leading a life with reverence?
It's actually very, very simple. It's honor and respect shown to an individual, an occupation, a person. It's just honor and respect, really.
Mm.
That's what reverence is. To revere somebody, to not assume that they're, an idiot, or not assume that their intentions are malicious, but to honor who they are and respect them right out of the gate. And that's hard to do too, because all it takes is a slur or something that you disagree with, and we quickly put up our dupes and get defensive and want to argue.
It sounds easy though, doesn't it?
It sounds easy, but it's more about if you're triggered by somebody like President Trump or anybody out there, you got to wonder, is that them or is that you? So you got to peel back that layer and ask the question, why is that person irritating me? What is it triggering in me? How can I look at that person out of a place of respect and honor without jumping to conclusions? And it's a tall order. It really is.
Yeah. In my book, if you are, and I'm going to say this as a generalization, I'm sure someone could find an exception to it, because that's the way life is. My belief would be, though, if you feel something, like you say, you're triggered by something, or someone, probably is more to the point, whatever it is actually telling you something about you.
Absolutely.
It's either highlighting something you don't like or about yourself,
Right.
or it's highlighting maybe a shortcoming in your knowledge or your understanding, or whatever it is. It's something I've really learned over the years and been taught, that it's that perception is projection and projection is perception. You cannot understand something in someone else without understanding it in yourself first.
Yeah, it's the classic example. If you have to walk in somebody else's shoes for a while before you can really have any judgment or any opinion, and it's important. It's just that we're in such a fast society and culture. We want to be able to pick that apart immediately and then have a stance. And I think that's part of the problem we have now too, is because there's no reverence for process. There's like the immediacy. I want to fix it now. I don't want to wait. I don't want to be patient, and I don't want to go through any kind of a process. I just want to know exactly what to do. And that leads to a culture that smacks of authoritarianism, which is kind of what we've been wondering what's been going on in the rhetoric here in the United States. And there's a sense that in a populist, because we're sort of all enamored with this sort of populist understanding of leadership, that an autocrat is the way to go, because then you don't have to think about it. you don't have to have an opinion. You just do what he says, and that's smacks of some very dangerous territory.
But in some ways, it makes life easier, doesn't it? If you just say, "Oh, right, okay, well, I just go with that." And I do think, there's so much with this. I mean, so for me, last year, I went through a whole load of ups and downs emotionally with things. I started looking into all the, if you like, the rhetoric of COVID and so on. And it's not something I tend to speak too much about, because it can be something that brings strong opinion on any way. But for me, because again, like with the NLP stuff, the L being linguistics,
right.
I'm very into language. And so I picked up fairly early on about things like, for example, words like from and with being used interchangeably. And I'm like, hang on, you can't just do that. Even COVID-19 and coronavirus being used interchangeably. And again, that's two separate things. And so it did start me down this journey of looking more and more. I wrote an essay of about 3,000 words. That was quite cathartic. I didn't show anyone other than my wife. That was the only person I shared it with. And it didn't really have a conclusion. It just felt good to get it out of me and kind of go, I've done some research. I've looked at this from different sides, and here's some things I found out that seem weird. Here's some things that don't seem to stack up, and some alternatives to what we were being told on the on the mainstream news and so on. And then for me, I went a bit deeper down, I don't know, towards the back end of last year. Again, started getting really quite angry, to be honest. Not just frustrated, but angry. And I'd looked at a load of stuff, and it doesn't matter the detail, just went fairly deep down in a bit of what I would call a research spiral. Really, one thing led to another and led to another. It's going down the rabbit hole, and my wife commented to me about, you're just getting angrier and angrier, and I was like, well, yeah, but it was part of the process, and for me, I did do some real thinking, and I've always been someone who's been fairly chirpy and smiley and looking on the brighter side. And I thought, what, actually that's my part in it. My part in this worldwide stage is as I say, my mission is to share love, light, and laughter. And that's one of the ways I can do this is through these podcasts. And so I love doing that. So I feel, for me, I've really, truly found my purpose. I think I've been for a good few years living close to it, fairly, along reasonably close to it. Now I really feel like I've truly found my purpose, and that for me is liberating. Beautiful. And it's amazing. It's a lovely place to be. And yet, of course, I recognize not everyone's in that position. So how do people start getting there?
Well, I think you have to first of all recognize the feelings, right? So you got angry. That's a part of the grief process, right? We're all grieving right now. And part of it is sort of being shocked at the reality that we're in. In our case here, we just, almost 400,000 people have died from this bloody thing. And all of us have known somebody that has perished, or at least know somebody who knows somebody that's perished. Yeah. And it's still out of control. And there's a feeling like nobody really cares anymore. And, it's not going to happen to me. Well, gosh darn it, it's going to happen if you're not too careful. So there's anger. There's a deep sense of sadness, I think, around the whole thing. And if you can not bury those feelings and acknowledge them and share them with a loved one or with anybody, it opens up the opportunity for some real reflection, some humility, which all of us, in this fast-paced world, we don't want to stop and feel sad. We don't want to feel anger. We feel like these are bad feelings. So, in my upbringing, if you had bad feelings, they weren't really accepted. You had to change that around. You had to switch it into something happy. But just doing that quickly doesn't really resolve the struggle that needs to happen interpersonally. So
that to me says more, if you're trying to do it that quickly, is that, and I might be misreading what you said there, so tell me, it almost suppresses those emotions. So
exactly.
Because
Exactly. If we suppress the feelings that we have, and I'm sort of stepping into my theological world, in a way, in my pastoral world, is that I knew that if I sat down with somebody who, just went through the death of a loved one or divorce or the loss of a child, I had a much better chance at helping them get out of that once they sat in those feelings and they sat in the place of being uncomfortable. We don't like feeling uncomfortable. we want to exit and jettison right out of those feelings because they make us feel bad. So we'll distract ourselves. We'll get into a project. We'll go split wood. We'll go, we'll drink. We'll do drugs. We'll do whatever we can to avoid them at our demise and our detriment. So, that's the way that I think God and divinity weaves into our concept of reverence is recognizing that we're always kind of swimming and catching different waves. And we are kind of molding ourselves and fashioning ourselves into better human beings when we wrestle with these feelings, and helping us arrive at a place where we can treasure who we are as people of faith and as lovers of life. And I just feel like I don't know what's happening over across the pond, but here, we distract ourselves ad nauseum to avoid going into that painful place. And
I think that's very right. And to me, and again, this is maybe making some assumptions and generalizations. Of course, it's in my perception, it's much more of a Western world issue. I don't think exclusively. I would say that because I don't think it is just Western world, and yet I think it maybe is primarily. I think there's a big link in with the whole idea of materialism and needing to buy more, and consumerism actually is probably a better
the transactional piece you can't refute. I mean, it's so easy to say, oh, I'm not feeling so good about this, I'm going to go on Amazon, I'm going to buy everything I've ever wanted to buy, and it'll arrive at my door tomorrow.
And even that's not enough now, is it? Because the next thing is that drones are going to pick it up, and as soon as you finish clicking that checkout button, already it's been picked and it's on its way. And that does, I know that we can joke about it, we can say it tongue in cheek, but it does worry me in many ways. Of that,
it does worry me too,
because it's the wrong happy hormone that's being pushed by. I mean, it's still good, but it's the short-term hit that you're getting rather than it being the real reward that you want to get. And that's what we need, is the more long-term right type of rewards that we should be striving for.
I think if I can talk about reverence in the context of how you do it in a daily basis. We don't really, and I mean we as a people don't take time to be in quiet. We don't take time to meditate. We don't take really time to be prayerful as often as we probably should. And we don't revere and respect that space. Now, I say that in generality. I mean, I myself try to make time every day to do those things because it centers me, it calms me down, and I realize I'm not alone. And then I can pick up a degree of serenity when I do these practices, and it keeps me from kind of being reactive to life. I mean, we've got a big week coming up here in the United States. We've got Martin Luther King Jr. today. We've got an inauguration on Wednesday, which we're preparing for the worst. We're preparing for, as a nation, we're preparing for people to come out, and who the heck knows what's going to happen, what kind of violence is going to be.
It is worrying. I think even from over here, there's still a sense of concern about what will or won't
I mean,
happen.
Are we going to survive that day? And is anybody going to lose their lives because there's still this threshold and this pocket, and it could be a big pocket of people that are just so angry at the results of a very fair election, in my view. And there's been no malfeasance around this whole thing, and it's been a good process. But the guy lost. It's just that a whole lot of people who felt he should have won, and they're not acting like civil servants. They're acting like belligerent little children, and it's quite frightening.
Again, we're back to that polarization, aren't we? There's
exactly.
No middle ground, no conversation. Something I did want to get your ideas and views on. There's a lot of talk around at the moment about the woke generation, and people, almost. Well, in fact, I was going to say I have seen such phrases bounded around now about how there's this kind of spiritual one-upmanship that goes on, and I'm more spiritual than you. I mean, it's. I don't even know where I'm going with it. Other than, I suppose in some ways it's. I feel almost like there's this relabeling of some things that have become unfashioned or old-fashioned rather. You can talk, like I'll give you an example. I'd said to someone at a meeting a while back, a friend of mine, Lex, we were talking, and one of the other guys there, Alex, said, that Tony Robbins said that the secret of living is giving. And and he quoted it as Tony Robbins, and Lex said, well, hang on, that comes from the Bible. That's not a Tony Robbins quote, or at least, maybe not in so many words, but the principle's there, right? So it's a bit like you said, why is it that people are more willing to accept what someone puts there on Instagram or whatever, or so on. And look, you could say I'm kind of one of those people, because I've as I said, I wouldn't class myself as religious. I wouldn't class myself as, certainly I'm not someone who's going to be going to church or anything like that. And yet I try and widen up what I read nowadays, and looking at different things and opening my mind to different things, whether it be videos on YouTube or reading books or whatever it might be. But it's, how do you try and marry up this kind of idea of spiritualism in a modern day world versus how it used to be, and the different meanings with that, and how I suppose the most important part that comes out to that is, how do you really connect with the younger generation as they come up through, so that, because this is a important aspect of life, certainly in my opinion. I never thought it was. So
in a classic sort of, I would say, modern vernacular, people are encouraged to, quote unquote, wake up, right? Wake up. It's important that we not just kind of do the same old, think with the same paradigms and structures of life, but to wake up to the potential and the purpose of our lives and what we can do. There are certain people out there that have definitely been an inspiration. Tony Robbins is one of them. There are a lot of motivational speakers out there that are kind of all speaking the same language, which is, hey, empower yourself, believe in yourself, go for your dreams, and something will, if you follow your bliss, as it were, like Joseph Campbell would talk about, following your bliss, following your passion, following your energy, and all kinds of mystical powers will come up and support you. And in a way, I think you're reaching out to me on LinkedIn is a way for me to continue my ministry as I continue to build what Reclaiming the Spirit is all about. And there is a component here where I want to embrace spirituality in such a way that it's not, people don't fear it. I do think the younger generation is divinely inspired, and they're looking for examples of what it means to be connected to the divinity, looking what it means to connect to God. And they're seeing it through these demigods. All right. You can, no matter where you stand politically, Trump was a demigod. Tony Robbins is a demigod. There are a lot of them out there, and some of them are speaking to a higher value and a higher cause. Some of them want to swim in the bottom part of the hourglass with all of its wrath and all of its bitterness and all of its victimhood, because that's easy. That's really easy. Guys like yourself are trying to, bring it up a notch or two or three or four. So we swim in the upper part of the hour. This is the metaphor I like to use. Life is an hourglass, right? And we've got this big part up top, which is goodness and grace and love and acceptance and unconditional love, if you will. And where we have fortitude and strength and grace and power and empowerment. And then, as we get into life and things start to get hard and we look at all the nastiness of life, we get closer to the bottom part of that top part. And it's a very narrow gap. It's a very narrow thing. But once we shoot through that and we get to the bottom, it becomes like this, we swim in, therefore, this current of nastiness. And it's very hard to go from the bottom to the top, but it's very easy to slip from the top to the bottom. So, you've got this metaphor as you were of that small little gap. What's the difference between people of faith or people who are empowered or people who are spiritual and people who are just guttural, nasty, vindictive, and brutal with their lives, and bitter and angry. And the difference between the top and the bottom is a small little gap, and I think it has a lot to do with where you stand with loving yourself, as we described earlier. And how do you love yourself? You love yourself by giving yourself the time to recognize that you're valuable, you're important, you're gifted. You are here on this earth for a purpose, and you have value and you have meaning. Now, the question is, what's our meaning? What is our purpose? You have found yours. I'm beginning to find mine again. Tony Robbins certainly has his. I mean, he's supported and financially enamored by millions of people. And so it's an interesting question. If we don't get bogged down with all of the distractions of life, and I think maybe that's part of the answer. We're so distracted by life. It's important for us to recognize how to center ourselves. And I use prayer and meditation as a means to kind of quiet down that outside world and to bring it closer to, and there's all kinds of ways to meditate. You can look at a candle for 5 minutes and just focus on the flame and at least quiet your mind. For some people, it's listening to Panache Desai, who has got this whole podcast on how to center and be calm in your life. For other people, it's reading some of the words of Mother Teresa. I happen to have met Mother Teresa a long time ago. That's a whole nother story.
Oh, wow. Oh, you're going to come back for that one then.
I'll come back for that one because it's a really interesting story. But what I learned with that woman who stood about 4'6", okay, in the evening of her evening in her courtyard in Rome, where I saw a halo above her head, I learned in that moment that there's an awful lot I don't know, and there's an awful lot that she did know about how to center her soul and recognize that she was a soulful being. And I think that's part of the journey of being reverent, is recognizing that every person, no matter who they are, has a soul. Everybody's got a soul. Whether they recognize that or not is the challenge of spirituality.
Would you go along that with spiritual beings having a human embodied experience then?
Oh, sure. I think we're actually all spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yeah.
That's not my language. That actually comes from Teilhard de Chardin, who used that. But I really believe that we're just walking spiritual people, and we got this human body, and we're trying to figure out how to align ourselves with what our true purpose is. And I think really fundamentally our true purpose is to love. And in your words, to bring life and joy to the world around us. Now, it's not a very popular sentiment because we love to be victims, and we love to, get mad about things and stop there.
It's what we're taught. And I think the interesting thing is, for me as well, is from what you're saying, is that really, as long as the message is right, it doesn't matter whether it's a pastor, whether it's coming from Tony Robbins, Deepak Chopra, Gabby Bernstein,
right.
As long as the message is right, really. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say. I think I think we also have to show an amazing amount of gratitude for the lives that we have. And I don't think we do that very well. We don't stop and say, here's my list of things that I'm grateful for. We stop and say, here's the things that on the list that I haven't gotten yet. And oh, by the way, the really important thing is as you said before, what can we give to life? I think we get stuck in what can we get? And that, unfortunately, I think is the evolution of consumerism in our world. It's all, our consumeristic world says, well, look, you can get. This is going to help you understand yourself. This is going to help you be who you want to be if you get. Mm-hmm. The real value of life and the joy that we have in life is by giving. And that is true. And I think, Tony Robbins, he could borrow that all he wants to, as long as he gives credit to the fact that it came from a biblical precept. But it isn't giving that we receive. I mean, it really is. But boy, in this world where we're so distracted and we're told we need to be this, that, or the other thing, and not really be comfortable with who we are as we are right now, that's going to be a tall order. It's a hard thing to accept.
I think the distraction is massive, and I think
Massive.
I mean, if I think so in if you like, former life, I was in marketing, and we used to talk about touch points. In other words, how many times you see something, you're aware of something before you will actually be spurred to take action.
Right.
And it used to be 3, and then it was like 5, then 7, and then it's just gone up and up and up and up. And the message that I take from that is just how we are totally overwhelmed by information.
Absolutely.
It's just like sensory overload. Mobile phones with especially on social media, you're just hit by thing after thing after thing after thing, and so taking that time to revere, as you say, to actually center ourselves, I think it can be really hard to do, because we're just so used to the idea of, oh well, you can do this at the same time, and you can multitask, and you can so on and so forth. And
right.
There is as well, I think, certainly, and again, I can say perhaps from my own experience, there's a certain amount, if you like, of maybe even fear. That might be too strong a word for some people, of actually spending the time and contemplating and just being in quiet reflection and saying, well, hang on, what am I here for? Am I really putting the right thing out in the world and with people? Am I fast forward 20, 30, 40 years, whatever it might be, am I going to look back and be proud? Am I going to think, yes, I've done the right thing? And I don't mean just, things like, of course, anyone would say they want to look after their family and loved ones around that. I'm talking about something bigger than that. And, maybe for some people, the 9 till 5 is enough, but even that's not true, is it? We talk about the 9 till 5, it's not. By the time you put a realistic day, most people are spending way more than that out at work. And Absolutely. Then they come back and they put the TV on. They're told what to think for a start. So they get the, if you go like a, what you might say is a traditional life, maybe you're commuting, you get the train or whatever, and you're reading stuff on your phone and you're just absorbed by that. And you get back, perhaps you watch the news, have something to eat, and then you watch some stuff on TV that makes you think that probably the world is an evil place because you're watching people being shot up and all the rest of it. And then you go to bed with all of that whirring around in your unconscious, and then you get up and you do it all again. And maybe, just maybe, over the weekend, you might get a little bit of time to yourself once you've washed the car and you've mowed the lawn and you've done all of those things and you've taken whatever to the repair and all those things that we have to do as kind of like life admin. And it can just seem, I think, overwhelming. And maybe there's a certain amount of privilege in being able to carve out enough time in your life where you can say, I can do some meditation, I can do this, I can do that, because life has got so busy for some people. And for many people, I can understand how many people would say, I haven't got time for that.
Yeah. And I guess maybe it boils down to, okay, were you placed on this earth to be self-centered and only concerned about what you want in life? Or is there a bigger point to the fact that you were created? And that in and of itself is a very deep concept for a lot of people, especially our young people, because our young people think that the whole world revolves around their needs. And it's a very tough message for a young person to realize that they're not the center of the universe, and that their actions do matter. So, when we live with the awareness that we are kind of connected to a divine presence in our lives, then our actions really matter, and our joy really matters, and our perspective really matters, and that translates into how we treat one another. Yes, but it also translates in how we treat nature,
Mm.
And our resources, and how our resources as a world have been extracted and used for economic gain, much to the detriment of what we are now dealing with in terms of global warming and ecological disasters. So, the translation of all this, how we love ourselves, permeates every aspect of our lives. And whether we're willing to use the other, the people out there who are self-righteous about this, our awakening as a means to just evolve ourselves, or to, jump up and down and say, hey, I'm awake now. I have a platform now to talk about why I'm doing it right and you're doing it wrong. I mean, that's just egoic, and that's just arrogant. So, to the point you were making earlier, there are going to be people out there that are just going to use this as a soapbox to talk about how great they are. And then you have to wonder, okay, well, wait a second. What are you doing? And is this really an independent and soulful journey of the self, so that I can actually emanate good energy around anybody I interact with and everything that I do? That's an individual relationship, and it's a spiritual relationship with yourself as much as it is with connecting with whatever divine entity you want to connect with.
It's so important, and I think I talk about communication a lot in the work I do, and there's no greater communication needed than communication with yourself. That's so important, to have a great communication with yourself. And the interesting thing as well is you're talking about how your actions matter and it's important, but I really get the feeling you're talking about in terms of how that impacts the world, rather than you're not saying that from the point of view of, oh, I should be in fear of doing the wrong thing, because if I do that, I'll get the wrath of God, and I'll be doing, however many Hail Marys and all the rest of it as penance. Right. That's not what you're talking about, is it? It's about impact, and
I'm talking
putting the
about
right energy out there.
I'm talking about the outcome of our thought process, and how we can feel good enough, to use a phrase that's batted around all kinds of ways. But am I good enough? Or do I aspire to be more than, or am I okay with who I am right now? And can I love myself as I am, even if I make a lot of mistakes? Because I think ultimately what we're really after is not being disconnected from ourselves, but being very connected with how we feel, and then therefore how we treat ourselves and those around us and the world in which we live. If I work for an energy company, would I still be concerned about Deepwater Horizon, that well that went off in the Gulf of Mexico, that spewed all kinds of oil into the Gulf, and for a month BP didn't really know what the hell to do, and it took them that long to be able to accept the offer from, in this case, the Biden administration, to come up with a physicist who actually could figure it out. But it took, it took humility. It took being able to say, yeah, I screwed that up, and I need help. And I think, if we were less arrogant about ourselves and less arrogant about our positions, as we were talking about way earlier, we'd find a way to bridge. We'd find a way to compromise. We'd find a way to help one another and do what was right. As opposed
that kind of arrogance comes from, we got a bit of feedback there. That kind of arrogance comes from fear and from scarcity kind of mindset, I would say, though, doesn't it?
Right. I think arrogance, fear is, I think, the most debilitating, but also the most, in some ways, the most stimulating feeling that we have, because it forces us into action, but it also makes us feel less than. And I think we have to acknowledge that we do have fear, and that it is a big trigger for many of us. But at the same time, the opposite of fear is faith, and recognizing that you're part of a bigger construct. And I think in and of itself, a lot of us can calm ourselves down, recognizing that we're just one piece in a big picture, and something else is out there helping to direct and guide that vision. And I have, and that's part of being spiritual too, recognizing it's not just about you, it's about everything around you. And that's it's important to take the ego out of the picture.
Definitely. It's interesting. There's a couple of things there that make me think, because I'm a firewalking instructor. And so we talk about fear quite a lot. And it has its uses, and one of the descriptors for fear I love is it's false evidence appearing real.
Right.
And I love that.
Right.
I mean, there are others and different people feel different ways about it. But to me, that's always been one that really it just seems right to me. That seems like the best way of describing it. And to me, I think, fear and faith, it's two sides of the same coin, really. Sure. Because both of them, you're saying, right, okay, here's something that is something that you're perceiving or is going to happen at some point, or it's something that you can't see, it's intangible, and so on and so forth. And so it becomes your interpretation of it. Do you want to interpret it as something that is to be feared, or is it something you can believe in and something you've therefore got faith in as well?
Yeah, I also think that, hey, look, this human experience is a growing experience, and it takes a big person to be able to step back and look at it all and say, okay, what's my part in this? How can I improve? How can I grow? How can I learn? And if you weren't kind of treading on the precipice of fear, and if you didn't feel the downside of life, you wouldn't necessarily be able to feel the upside of life. And
so you need the contrast.
You need the contrast. And from a biblical perspective, almost every anecdote that I've looked at over the years, my whole lifetime, there's always two paths, right? And they're equally valuable to look at. And contrast and opposites allow us to grow and see and have wisdom. And I'm trying to think of the author. I think it was oh gosh, I can picture him, but I can't think of him. There's two paths in the wood, and I took the least path, and it's made all the difference in the world. And either Robert Louis Stevenson or somebody else, but it's for I think every person, it's an individual decision. But at the same time, when I think of reverence, I think of the beauty and the process of the development of the soul, and honoring and respecting what we are and how we can apply learning in our lives and accept that. And even the people who, as we were saying before, who are unabashedly supportive of disinformation and supporting, candidates out there that are just, as far as I'm concerned, belligerent. I gotta have some room in my life to hear what they have to say. Otherwise, I'm being a bigot myself, and I don't want to do that.
All behavior comes from a positive intent.
Yeah, exactly.
in that person's map of the world, and yet, of course, there is some difficulty, I suppose, with having the reverence, having the humility to listen to someone else's opinion. Doesn't mean you've got to be a pushover, does it? That's where I'm going with it. You can still have an opinion. You can still be even assertive with your opinion. It's just the difference is it's not saying that this is the only way, and that I cannot hear anything that pushes that opinion out of the way or in somehow knocks me from where my standpoint is.
Yeah, I think and in that regard, if you're connected and recognizing that you're on the path to greater enlightenment, if you will, you're identifying a more soulful stance and a more wise stance and a stance that reflects wisdom. And maybe it takes a number of decades to finally get to that place after living life, maybe as long as I have, and perhaps as long as you have, where you begin to see how things are working, and how what bothered you in your 20s isn't bothering you in your 50s. and that you can stand up and be an example of honor and respect in ways that you weren't able to do, a long time ago.
And it probably goes the other way around as well. Of what bothers you in your 50s doesn't bother you in your 20s, and so
That's true.
I think age is yeah, that's part of it. I mean, it's definitely not all of it, but I do think it's a part of it for sure. And we're all wired up. I love human behavior because we're all wired up in the same way and all wired up in completely different ways at the same time, and that's what makes it interesting and wonderful. Something I was thinking is I know from some conversations I've had recently, not everyone has this feeling of connection. And they don't feel well. Actually, when I say that, that's not that they don't feel that they haven't got a feeling of connection in their life, because I know they've said to me that they feel very much connected with other people and on a human to human level, that they have some really strong connections in their life. So it's not that they're unable to feel connection. What I'm talking about is that connection with something bigger, wider, spiritual connection, connection with the universe, anything along those lines would be something that they don't feel they have, and they don't feel that they're seeking it or that they're missing out by that. But and everyone, everyone is how they are, and I totally accept that. And so I think the hardship perhaps in some ways is trying to balance. If you feel that you've had a spiritual experience or a spiritual awareness or awakening, that you maybe want to share that with people, and yet how do you do that? Because one of the things which I loved about your LinkedIn description was that you say you're a spiritual mentor. So you're not a spiritual teacher, you're not a spiritual preacher, you're not, and so on. There's a whole load of different words you could have put there. Mentor to me is very much saying, look, you come to me if you want to, and I'll help you along the way. I'm not kind of pushing any of this on you. And yet, do you not feel if you're passionate about something, you want other people to share in that?
Oh, for sure. I think here's what the reason I chose that word mentor is I want to be in a relationship with somebody, and I want to help them see, or at least identify, what drives them spiritually, what the questions they have of God, or the questions they have of their faith, or even their religion, whatever it may be. I run into a lot of people who have quit going to certain denominations because they just can't stand the stance that, say, Catholicism has towards abortion, right? Because they don't believe in it. They feel, for example, to use that hot button, that it's important for a woman to have her own choice, and to make that choice based on their anatomy and the strain and the toil that a woman's going to put into bearing a child. As men, who the hell can we say that that's the wrong attitude? You've got people on the other saying, hey man, life is precious, life is reverent, right? You should not take away the ability to provide a womb for something that's living inside of you. It is a God creation. You got to find all kinds of people who really believe in that too. So, you got two sides of the same coin. And you just got to decide in a sense where you land. And as a mentor, I'm not there to tell somebody, hey, your belief in life after death is stupid. This is the only life that we've got, right? I'm not here to tell people that their belief system is wrong. I'm here to encourage people to go into a place of discernment, to ask deeper questions, and to recognize that in that questioning, in that reflection, in that silence, in that prayer, in that hopefulness, that more will be available to them in a spiritual way. They will come up with the answers themselves. And yes, I'll guide them, I had a woman the other day call me up and say, hey, I need a spiritual guide. And I said, great, but recognize that I will only guide you as much as you want to guide yourself. I'm here to kind of push you into thinking things through, but I'm not pointing towards a certain direction. Go this way. There are many different angles on the axis of your life. Let's find out where you are. But here's the other part that I try to do with people. What in your background has created the paradigm that you're looking through? What has happened in your family life? What has happened in your personal life? How were you traumatized as an individual? How is it that you are who you are right now? And how is it pinpointing, or how is it pushing you in certain directions right now? And do you want to change that? Do you want to look at it? Do you want to peel that onion back? Because let me tell you, if you peel the onion back, you may cry. And it can be very painful to do that, but at the same time, it can be very enlightening. And it can open up all kinds of awareness. So that's why I chose the word mentor, because a good mentor is not one that preaches per se, but encourages, supports, loves, and enables and empowers a person to find out what direction they want to go in.
And to me, it's very much a big coaching element that you do
Yes.
with it, and
yes.
It's not about you saying, right, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. It's about getting them to the place that they want to go, or maybe they think they want to go, and
a place where they may maximize for themselves where they want to go. And for some people it'll take one session, for others it takes many sessions and maybe years. And I liken it to the body. I do a lot of work on bodies, and I've got guys that come to me who are consummate professionals. They want to be able to play the best game of tennis they've ever played, and they want me to be able to fix them. And I said to a guy who's one of my clients, who had 2 hip replacements, and both hip replacements are very different. His hips are different. I said, look, I can't fix that, but all I can do is help you understand that, and let's stretch, and let's appreciate what's going on inside your body and open things up so that you can play your best game of tennis. But you have to recognize where you've been, where you want to go, where you are, and where you want to go. And all I can do is help you get there. I can't get you there.
Yeah. And that, I think there's some great metaphors there as well for the spiritual mentoring as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very similar.
We all come into this camp from different places, and we have to at least take the time to have reverence for one another and recognize that there is honor and respect first right out of the gate, and then we'll peel it back and find out where else we can go with our beliefs. And it's a mystery, really. I think the spiritual life can be mysterious, and I think it's important that we recognize that it will always be mysterious. It's never going to be ironclad. It's never going to be the same. It's always going to change and evolve. And I'd like to think that even in the religious life or the church life, churches evolve, denominations evolve, ecclesiastical societies evolve, and they're never going to. Somebody said to me once, I just want church to be the same every Sunday. So because my life is crazy enough, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, yeah, well, that's not real. Why do you think the church needs to stay where it is just so you can feel comfortable? It's not really if we're not a growing, evolving organization or institution or organism, we're going to be deader than a doornail. And I think that that's kind of what's happened to the church right now. There's places where the churches are evolving. It's scary. And many people will look at it as though it's heretical. But at the same time, I've evolved, from being what I call a congregational minister with a Trinitarian belief system to now really looking at the Eastern traditions and saying, there's a lot of value there, to the point where I've looked at the path of Jesus, and I say, okay, let's ask me questions about those lost years from the time that he was confirmed in the synagogue, and then became who he was in Palestine 25 years later. We don't know much about those lost years. I happen to think, for example, that he went on the trade route east and spent a lot of time in India and Pakistan and learned from the gurus and the yogis how to be a healer. and how to transcend, how to pray, how to meditate. There's no way he learned that just by sitting at a carpenter's table and just hanging out. I don't think that's real. So, for example, 2 years ago, I went to India. I went to some of the places where I think he hung out, and where there are local stories about Yeshua who spent time there, and challenged the people there as well. You can't tell me that he didn't learn the tricks of his trade somewhere else. And that's our lives. Our lives are we are on different paths, and we're going to learn from those paths, or we're going to be haunted by the mistakes that we make, so that we will learn eventually. I think this life is all learning experience. I really do.
I think for those of us that enjoy learning, it is that, but I mean, certainly I love learning. I love learning. I love feeling that I'm growing, because growth is important to me. And,
Yeah.
and that's not the case for everyone, I suppose. And the thing it makes me think about with what you said there about the different parts of, if you like, east and west marrying somewhere in the middle, which, funnily enough, it does a lot of the time, because if you said the Middle East being the middle, if you want to look at it in that kind of way, but so much, I think back to the days of when, as kids, we used to go to church as a family. So much of it was just like this. I don't know. I was going to say the kind of iconography, but the idea that there's God is this kind of white-haired, bearded man that sits up in a cloud in heaven, and that Jesus is this, that, and the other. And so much of it just felt unrealistic. And I think, especially when you're young, trying to make sense of what some of the metaphor was. Didn't really ring true, and so it was quite hard to try. Some things you were meant to take literally, other things you were meant to take metaphorically, and yet, often with not much of an explanation to understand why. And yet, you look at some of the things that's being put out there now of talk about how we need community and a sense of belonging and being with people, like-minded individuals, whether that could be a business networking club that you belong to, or whatever. There's those feelings people have for that. Spending time working on yourself and actually taking the time to look after yourself, and, as you say, to revere, to be reverent, to really spend time through meditation is probably the most popular. It's more popular, if you like to say, affirmations and incantations is more. Yeah, I'm going to say popular, but perhaps for many people, there's more of a connection there anyway. Whether it's popular or not, it's just easier to understand than the idea of kneeling down at your bedside with your hands clasped together, praying to a God that you don't really understand or don't get. And to me, this whole idea of and I have had some thoughts actually since me saying a few weeks back on one of the first podcasts that God, the universe, and source is just interchangeable wording. I think it can be, but I think for me it's now becoming not. But that, again, like you said in other things, that's a whole nother subject and a whole nother podcast. But I just think this idea that it's about trying to work out what makes sense in terminology that people can understand and that feels right as well. And to my understanding, the idea of God, or whatever you want to take as your understanding of that to me, that just seems like something that our little human minds can't even get the concept of, let alone to be able to say, oh yeah, it's this guy and this is what he looks like. It's like, maybe if I had gone to a church when I was younger, that maybe the rhetoric had been more along the lines of, there's this thing called God, or you might want to call it this or something else, that is so unbelievably big and amazing and so on and so forth, you can't even get your head around it. None of us can. Right. Maybe that's something I could have bought into more. I don't know. It's at 40 4, it's easy for me to look back and say that now. I don't know what I would have felt like as a kid.
I think the key is to be exposed and open and curious about beliefs and about reverence, for example. And if we're trying to channel kids and people through a certain lens and only look at that subject or that perspective through one viewpoint, we're doing everybody a disservice. So it's important, I think, to, no matter how solid I may feel about, let's put it this way. If I, as a kid, I believed that Jesus had blonde hair and blue eyes, and that was the only way I could envision Jesus, and I grew up defending that, I'd be much less of an individual. I think you have to look at the whole perspective and say, well, wait a second, that's a nice European way of thinking of things, a Western way of looking at things. But the reality is, he was a Jew from Palestine. He probably had black hair and black eyes and had a darker complexion than I'm willing to recognize. And, and by the way, Jesus was Jewish. So, for those out there who think, Christianity was designed and created to serve a certain population, they're dead wrong. So to be open and to be curious and to check and balance our beliefs is really, really important, which is really part of also being reverent. You're respecting and honoring the fact that there are different viewpoints and different opinions.
Yeah, definitely.
And eventually you come to your own, and you can defend being curious and open-minded about everything. And that's until you get to a point where you say, well, no, I really think it's important to love somebody and not hate them. Okay. I think it's an important part of my value system, and I'm gonna stand on that. And I'm gonna hold firm in that place. But if I get into an accident out front and somebody breaks my leg, I'm gonna be mad at them. You damn well sure I'm gonna be mad at them. And it doesn't mean I'm gonna hate them, but it's a fun thing to kick around, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do it with you. And I think what I'd like to say finally is that there's a word in Genesis which talks in the early part of creation story, which says basically mankind or humankind will have dominion over all things, and that's the English translation of the Hebrew. But really, what the Hebrew says is have stewardship, which changes the whole dynamic of what it means to work with nature and to work with animals and to work with people, to be good stewards of each other. And I think what you're doing in your podcast is you're being a good steward to what it means to be inspired, but also what it means to be loved, and how to spread joy around the world, but also how to spread understanding. And so, that's what inspired me about signing up to be part of your podcast. And I'd love to tell the Mother Teresa story. It's one of my most favorite stories, and it's it was the whole. I won't spoil it. So maybe another time.
Well, I think definitely another time. And look, thank you for your kind words as well. It's really, really appreciated. And I've had an absolute blast talking to you today. It's been
me too. So let's keep it up. We'll be pen pals on LinkedIn now.
Oh, most definitely. And yeah, we'll get you back without a doubt, because as you probably remember, I'm online for doing 108 episodes by the end of 2021. So, we can have you back again. That's absolutely fine. And just a great thanks to you as well for coming on today. Sam. Really, really appreciate it.
Have a great evening over there.
Yeah, thank you. And
it's dark.
All the best for the rest of this week and of course until we.
Yeah, keep us in your prayers. It's going to be a wild ride, I think, and hopefully it'll be quiet, but I'm guessing it won't be.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you again. That's the Reverend Dr. Mark Haleshorn. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again.
Very good. Bye, Sam. Bye, everybody. Thanks. Bye.
You've been listening to Sam Dyer on the 108 Big Words podcast. Check out the website at 108bigwords.com for contact details, other episodes, and links you may find of interest. Your support is massively appreciated, so please share and subscribe. Wishing you love, light, and laughter. See you next time. Thanks for listening.